Great pleasure to be here with all of you. I thank you all for coming. I'm honored to have this wonderful turnout. I've known some of you for a long time. Greg and Patty still here? There they are. So I've known Patty since elementary school. So that's a first piece, a long time. And some of the rest of you I've known for many, many years. And I thank you for coming, whether you're new or whether you're an old friend. Constance, I can't thank you enough for all the things that I learned working with you. And I will just say to everybody, I've had a wonderful life because I had a wonderful education. Yes, I was born and raised in California, 5th generation on my mom's side, but nobody loved California more than my dad. He was from Kentucky, and he liked to say, Californians are people born somewhere else who came to their senses. So the truth is that I did have a wonderful time in city government. I actually was at De Anza College and Kenyatta College and at their satellite campuses teaching, and I got appointed to the Planning Commission because I was going to write the definitive textbook on California state and local government. And somehow I got the bug and wound up being somebody's campaign manager who was running for election and later ran myself. So that's how I came to go to the private sector, because I wanted to be, Prop 13 had passed. I was up for a full-time job and I got passed over because they froze all new hires. And so I went to the private sector. And I will say I'm glad I did. I learned a lot. So I learned things like long-range planning at the company that we worked for. So imagine my surprise when I got to the legislature, having served 2 terms in the city council, and I asked to see the long-range plans. You know, the city was required to have a long-range plan, and the county was required to have a long-range plan, so I asked to see the long-range plans. Finally, I got to Water Parks and Wildlife, and the consultant said, yeah, we have a long-range plan. It was done under Governor Brown, Pat Brown, 1957. It is still the most recent water plan. You want to know why there's an $800 million problem at Oroville? Maybe it has something to do with the fact we're not doing any water planning. And oh, by the way, the Higher Ed Master Plan, that was done in 1960 under Pat Brown. You get the picture? So there's some things that are broken in Sacramento. And I did leave public life. I went and ran an institute back in D.C., the National Institute for School Leadership. I came back, was teaching at Mills College, and I was a distinguished professor of educational leadership. But I watched as California was disinvesting again in education. And I have to tell you all, I'm a machinist daughter. My mom's a dress clerk, right? So I get to go to the wonderful schools of California. And it changed my life forever, and I want that for every kid. But guess what? We're not doing that right now. We were 5th of the 50 states when I graduated from high school. California was tied with New York. Today, New York spends more than twice as much per child as California. You want to know how bad that is? We are living in the most expensive state in the union, with the largest number and percentage of poor children and the largest number and percentage of English learners. We should be in the top 10, not the bottom 10. Meanwhile, when I got accepted at UC Davis, I have to say at that time, the Civil Rights Act had not taken effect. And so women could not borrow money under the College Student Loan Act until they were 21. Men could borrow at 18. So it meant my parents had to borrow the money at 7.5% interest on a 3-year loan. My mother talked to the bank manager, and he said, why, in 3 years you'll be paying twice your house payment on her loans. And my mother was afraid to do it. So I went into my dad, and I said to him in a very mature voice, Daddy, sugar says I can't go to Davis. And my dad went in. He'd been accepted at college in 1930, but it was the Great Depression. Their house burned down, and his father went bankrupt, and so he went into the Navy and sent money home. He never got to go to college, so he was bound and determined that I would go. And my mother said, well, what do you suggest we do? Take a second mortgage out on the house? My father thought for a minute and said, we'll sell the damned house if we have to. She's going to Davis. And so I got to go to Davis, and it was life-changing. And then I got to go to UC Santa Barbara for graduate school. By then I was borrowing the money and working 3 jobs. But you know what I did? I did a paper on the politics of Bayfill. And I joined the Save San Francisco Bay Association in graduate school, and I've been a member ever since. Because I believe that we have a responsibility Yes, to our children and their education. Yes, to our environment and our surroundings. Yes, in fact, to building a society that works for everybody. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to do a full court press on housing. Some of you know, we have the oldest children living at home with their parents of any state in the union. Not to mention the largest number and percentage of homeless of any state in the union. I've seen homeless places I never thought I would see them. And they are a serious problem all over our state. So I will just say to all of you, it's time for us to really have a full court press to build housing. And then let us have a conversation about the environment. My grandmother lives through the '06 earthquake. Her grandmother actually dies as a result of the earthquake. So I'm a fifth-generation Californian. We had earthquakes before they were fashionable. We don't need to be fracking in California. I say ban the fricking fracking right away. Now, for 18 months, none of the other candidates were talking about banning the fracking. But now one of them got up the other day and said, well, he's going to ban new fracking. So we're going to let the old stuff continue? Not me. And we all have to understand, putting poison water in the ground is like the dumbest thing I could ever imagine. So in addition to doing a long-range water plan, we've got to be a lot more nimble about what we do with water in this state. And we've got to make sure everybody's got clean air and clean water, and that can't just be a function of your income. Every part of California needs our attention in that regard. I'll also say to all of you, and I want to talk a little bit about higher education, because most people don't realize that when you were all growing up, 18% of the state budget went to higher ed. 3% went to prisons. Higher ed is down below 12%. Prisons are above 9%. You are 41st in per pupil spending and number 1 in per prisoner expenditure. How many of you think that's a good plan? Yeah. I haven't met a single Californian. In fact, I had a couple of correctional officers come up to me and say, I'm a correctional officer. I don't think it's a good idea. So you want to know the best crime prevention program? It's called education. You want to know the best economic development program? It's called education. You know, the Silicon Valley wasn't born here because of a confluence of rivers. You've been down there. You've been to Santa Clara. There's no Tigris. There's no Euphrates. It was a confluence of educational opportunities that created the Silicon Valley. And we can and should be doing it again. But guess what happened? Since 1985, we built 1 UC campus, 3 CSUs, 9 campuses of the community college. Do the math with me. Remember, there's 107 community colleges. There's, 23 CSUs. There are 10 UCs. Total of 13 campuses since 1985. In that same period of time, congratulations, we built 23 prisons. Jeez. Who likes that? So I'm here to tell you that my favorite quote probably in the world, and for some of us in this room whose parents are no longer with us, I'm sure this will be as much of a gut punch to you as it was to me. But it is Neil Postman who said, children are living messages we send to a time we will never see. What is our message to the future? I know that the people that sent me here were generous beyond all imagining. They did so much for me and for my generation. Can we do the same? I think we can. And along the way, we'll get dividends. It'll be called lower crime. It'll be called less incarceration. It'll be called a great economic development boom. It'll be called tomorrow. And that's who we need to be. The people that were here before us were really amazing in my opinion. That's why I'm glad to see such a crowd here tonight. The fact is, if I gave you 20 pencils one at a time, you could all break all 20 pencils. But the strongest man or woman in this room can't break those 20 pencils if they're together. We need to stand together on behalf of our kids. I learned in college that democracy comes from 2 Greek words, demos and kratos, government by the people. Greeks also invented the word idiot. It means one who does not participate in politics. So I want to thank you all for not being idiots, for being here tonight, and for being committed to making the future much better than it will be unless we step up. Unless we step up and say, yes, we can do this. Because a bunch of people coming out of a depression and war did it for us. Thank you so much for the chance to be here. I want to answer some questions. So. Great question. Thank you for that. Well, I'm obviously very involved in a lot of environmental groups, and I love our park system. And I've been to all 58 counties, so I know California about as well as anybody you'll ever meet. I went to visit schools, but along the way I got to see some breathtaking places. I'll just tell you all that I really do believe there are lots of departments in state government that are not doing optimally. Not because the people are bad, not because they're evil, not because they're lazy. It's just because of a lack of really good management. When I got to the Department of Education, I've never been to a more demoralized organization in my life. We had people on IBM computers and Apple computers that couldn't email each other. Nobody seemed to think that was a problem. The first week I was there, one of the wonderful people that I brought to work at the department, he went to Harvard and Stanford, so he's no slouch. But he said the first week, he says, Delaine, I got somebody I got to bring in. You got to meet him. You got to talk to this guy. Now, I know that we all like to think about education as curriculum and as excellent teaching and the glamour of really good gardens and better lunches and all the good things that we like to talk about. But I'll just tell you something. One of the things the school districts really care about is whether that check goes out and whether we pay so they can keep the schools open. So Richard brings this guy into my office and he says, I want to introduce myself. I'm a 74-year-old retired annuitant, meaning I'm retired and I get paid extra to come here and keep the checks coming. I'm the only person in the department that knows how this system works. I'm a retired annuitant. I could die tomorrow. You need somebody else to come here and as an employee to know what we're doing here, and you probably need to modernize it. I'm not the sharpest blade in the drawer. You know, I'm 74. And so in reality, when I walked around the department, people were like, you're the superintendent, you're in my office? What are you doing here? Well, I walked around the department, I discovered people took me to show me the mold that was growing out of the heat vents. The building was sick. We had people that couldn't work in the building because they had sick building syndrome, really. And so it was, but it wasn't that everybody was a bum or a lazy knucklehead. It was, in fact, that nobody ever asked them, how could we do our work better? What could we do to improve our delivery of services? Why aren't we allowed to go out and visit the schools? There's never money for travel. We really need to get out there and find out what's wrong. I went into the special ed director. He had a rotary dial phone and a typewriter on his desk. He said, I've been thinking about retiring. In my mind, I was thinking, I think you have. So, you know, so what we did was we started listening to the employees. We got them involved in strategic planning. We got them involved in asking them how they could help us. I brought the head of general services over and shouldered the mold growing out of the, I said, you got to fix this. You're breaking state law. Really, they were. And so at the end of the day, I know people at DMV, EDD. I know people at Caltrans, and a lot of them feel like the department people used to feel. Nobody really asks them how they could do their jobs better. So one of the things I think I bring to this conversation is a more nimble approach to a lot of things. I love the parks. It isn't just about setting aside the acreage, it's about maintaining them. It's about making them available so people can have access. And I commit to you, as somebody who's been probably to as many parks as anybody who's as busy as I've been in my life, as anybody in this room. I love parks, and I belong to the State Park Foundation. I belong to Life Member of the Sierra Club. I really do Save the Redwoods League. You name it, I belong to it. But what we need is a lot more nimble leadership in a lot of departments in California. And if we do that, everybody will be having a lot more fun, because I have people come up to me. You can ask my staff, they say, you know, Delaine, those 8 years you were superintendent were the 8 best years I worked in the department, because we were all on a mission. Imagine what we could do if we could really empower people and put everybody at California Parks on a mission to get this done. And I'm convinced there's a lot more that we can and should be doing in terms of financially. But one of the things is the fees right now have gone way, 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 way up, and I'm amazed how high they are, and I think it's making a lot of working class families can't even go to the parks right now unless they slip in accidentally. So, you know, so thank you for the question, though. With you more. In my youth, I was teaching down at Ventura College, and they asked me to teach a class at the Ventura California Youth Authority. And it was such an eye-opening experience, but it actually broke my heart. Yeah. Because I met this young woman who'd been addicted to heroin by her mother at the age of 13. and put in a prostitution stable. She's in jail. Shouldn't the mother maybe have had some, how to say, correction? But at the end of the day, I don't know what the mother's story is. I just tell you we have to stop this. So in Switzerland, for a long time, they were treating drug problems as if they were crime problems. And they were locking these people up. And then one day somebody said, how about if we started treating drug problems like they were a mental health problem? And guess what happened? They saw a dramatic decline in the number of drug addicts they had. So I will say to all of you, we have to really rethink all of this. We've got too many kids that are being thrown out because they didn't have dinner last night, they didn't have breakfast this morning, they're frantic because they're in an abusive household, and yet we put them in some kind of a lockup. And it is based on poverty and on color oftentimes. So I'll just say to you, I couldn't agree more. I think we have a lot more work to do, but it is possible. So I got off of most of my boards when I started running for governor, but I'm still on the court-appointed Special Advocates Board at foster care in Yolo County. And I'll just tell you, I've had an epiphany. I met a young woman who asked me to be her mentor when she was at UC Santa Barbara. She had been at Mills. She'd heard about me at Mills, but I stopped teaching because I had a couple of elderly relatives I had to take care of. So she never took my class, but she sought me out, asked me if I could help her with her dissertation. She got her PhD in UC Santa Barbara in 5 years. She's the only one in her class that got a master's and a PhD in 5 years. Most took 6, 7, or 8 years. She did it in 5 years, and we worked on her dissertation. She asked me, I said, is there anything I can do besides help you with the question? She said, well, would you be the first interview? I said, of course. What else can I do? She said, well, here's a list of former members, men and women, who I want to interview for this paper. But I can't they don't returning my calls, or I don't have a number for them. So I said, I'll get you every number. And when I went to her graduation, I have to tell you, you know who was there? Her high school counselor. 2 of her high school teachers came. Nobody from her family was there. Her beau was there with his family, and a couple of her college professors were there, and I was there. She went on to get a job at PACE, California Policy Analysis in California Education at Stanford. Then she became the lead consultant on the Assembly Appropriations Subcommittee on Education. She just got hired as the vice chancellor of the California Community College system. She's out of foster care from the age of 8. So if we get this right, we can save lives and make wonderful, wonderful stories like that about contributing to the future of California, instead of giving up on kids or throwing them in the slammer or you know, losing our hearts over this. And there are a lot of kids. I'm fond of saying, and some of you who heard me speak before know that I often say, if you're not from a dysfunctional family, I'll bet you married somebody from a dysfunctional family, or your best friend is from a dysfunctional family. I am a triple dipper. And I was raised in a house, my mother and father were loving, but my mother was a terrible alcoholic, and so was her mother who lived with us. Our house was crazy. It was especially bad if my dad was working nights. And so I had those teachers and those counselors who helped me. And I'll just say to you, we can save these kids, but we've all got to put our shoulder to the wheel. And we've got to start dreaming big dreams again, like was dreamed for us. Because I'm convinced that there are many more daisies out there, many more of these kids that if we give them half of a chance, they'll make something of their lives. And I've seen it my whole life, and I continue to believe that it's true. But remember, right now in California, we have the largest class size in America. So the teacher may not realize that the quiet kid is quiet because she was up until 4 in the morning because people were screaming. The kid that is acting out in class is really in a home where she shouldn't be, where there's crazy things going on. We forget sometime that we need to have, yes, smaller class sizes, but we also need to bring back the nurses. There's a nurse that called my mother and said, get her eyes checked. She needs to wear glasses, and the nurse was right. Some of you, I bet, had that experience, because I've met a lot of people. It was a counselor in high school who called me into her office the first day of high school and chewed me out. She told me that I needed to take different classes if I was going to get in the University of California. I didn't know the difference between college prep and university prep. And when I became superintendent of schools, I got UC and CSU to have the same entrance requirements, because it was really dumb they didn't. And I didn't have to write a bill to do it. I just asked them as a regent and as a trustee, come on, you guys, let's get this together. And they did it. But overall, there's a lot of reasons we should have counselors. I went to a middle school in Tustin where there was one counselor for 1,100 kids. She said she was so busy counseling the kids about homelessness and about other challenges, she hardly had time to talk about academics. We got to bring back the librarians. We got to bring back the supports for the children. So.
Psychological services.
Yes, well, that's what I mean, the counselors in particular. Okay, well, this is a softball for me, but I'll tell you. I'm at De Anza College, and I do a Women See How They Run conference. Remember, I'm trying to get a full-time job. So I did a Saturday conference, and at that time, San Jose was considered the feminist capital of California, in fact, Santa Clara County. It was the first city of over 100,000 in the nation that had a woman mayor was San Jose, Janet Gray Hayes. And she came to my conference. And then it was the first county that had a majority of women on the Board of Supervisors, Santa Clara County. So I did this workshop, and I had the keynote speaker, Assemblywoman Leona Eglin. Leona is now Leona Eglin Rice. She's still a living and wonderful woman in Napa and still fighting to elect women. But she got up, and one of the students asked, is there a women's caucus in the legislature the way that there is in the Congress? She thought for a minute and said, well, if we were a caucus, we could meet in a phone booth. We're happy a third woman has just been elected. We're talking the 70s in California. So when I get to the legislature, the year is 1986. In the total history of our state, we'd had 31 women. Total, we'd had the vote for 75 years. We got the vote in 1911. Total of 75 years, total of 31 women. That year, there were the biggest class of women in the history of the state. 5 new women. We were on the cover of the California Journal. It was Bev Hansen, Rebecca Morgan, Marion Bergeson, Jackie Spear, and me. And it was amazing. Things would happen like I'd go to caucus and I'd make a suggestion and they'd pass over it. 10 minutes later, one of the guys would make a suggestion and everybody'd go, brilliant, what a brilliant idea. And that happened to me, and Jackie Spear stood up and said, wait a cotton picking minute. That was exactly what Delaine suggested 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. I don't think it was the same, was it? I said, yeah, it was exactly the same. And so, I mean, let's be clear. I'm here to say men of quality are not threatened by women's equality. My dad, the big old 19-inch neck hillbilly, there was no better feminist in the world than him. Where I was concerned, but he believed in women. He had a great mom and great sisters and brothers, and he's one of 13. But I'll just tell you all, the time has come when the research shows when you get over 30% women, and we've only had 1 2-year period in the state legislature where we did that. When you get over 30% women, whether it's Congress, a parliament, a legislature, wherever it is, values change. More is invested in families, education, healthcare, and seniors. Where do you think we should be spending the money? It sounds like a pretty good list to me. And so I will just stipulate that I believe that part of the challenge in this country, when you have jalopy schools and Cadillac prisons, there's something wrong. When you're number 1 in the country in per prisoner expenditure and 41 in per pupil, there's something wrong. When you have an enormous defense, but you're not educating your kids or sending them to college, there's something wrong. You know who said, have you ever read the Cross of Iron speech? This is just part of it. Every bomb that is made, every missile launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who are hungry and are not clothed. This world in arms isn't spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. Dwight David Eisenhower said that. And I will just tell you, if you follow the values of this country, you ought to be investing in education. You ought to be investing in families, in health care, and in seniors. And if we do that, we'll have a more compassionate, better society, because they did it once and showed us how to do it. We need to reform Prop 13. And I'm willing to touch the third rail of California politics. And with your help, I think if we go to listen, when they passed Prop 13, they put a 1% limit on how much property tax would be. The assumption was when 50% plus one of the stock turned over, companies would get reassessed. Guess what? They don't reassess the companies at all. Not even when 50% of the stock turns over. Disneyland is paying what it paid in 1978. So I say we go to the voters and we ask them, how about if we change Prop 13 so that it's 1.5% on commercial and industrial, and we reassess them every 10 years? And we put all that money into education. And the voters would say, yeah, let's do that. And you know, the number for Chevron's savings that would have gone to the Richmond schools for that refinery since Prop 13 passed is $100 million. Imagine what might have changed in the Richmond schools if they'd had that $100 million. And I'm saying to you, it's time for us to have this conversation. By the way, they passed 13 to lower the share that homeowners were paying. At that time, homeowners were paying 54% of the property taxes. You know what it is today? It's 72%. So, because you do sell your houses every 20 or 30 years. They do turn over. And guess what? They get reassessed when you do that. But Disneyland never gets turned over. And so, come on, ladies and gentlemen, if we gave it to the kids, I think it would be the right thing to do. Gave it to education. There are lots and lots of suggestions. I do believe that if you have not met your affordable housing targets, you have to speed up the process and do more to approve it. I also believe that this change in 13 might actually free up some properties, because guess what happened with the Ghost Fire? That was some cheapskate that didn't want to be reassessed, so he illegally turned the warehouse into apartments, and people died because he didn't want to get reassessed. So, I mean, we have to do more, though. We have to bring back redevelopment. I'll tell you what we did in Union City. We had 3 huge factories. One was Pacific State Steel. They went bankrupt. One was Liquid Air. They went out of business. They moved out of California. And one was the PG&E pipe storage yard, but it was actually where they were storing PCBs. Oh, they got a permit from the state. They just didn't bother to tell the city. And since I was on the city council, they didn't even have a good fence around it, and they had no guard. And it was right next to BART, 3 blocks from the high school. I mean, seriously, 3 blocks from an elementary school, across the street from a residential development next to the downtown. If there'd been a problem there, it would have ruined the town. So we wound up suing PG&E to get that stuff out of there, and they sued us and named us as individuals. And I got an attorney, and I stood up to them, and we won. So we wound up with 3 big pieces of property, but they needed to be cleaned. They had toxics on them, all of them. So guess what? We cleaned most of those properties, and now there are multi-story affordable and market rate housing. And guess what? The families love it. You know why? Because they walk around the corner and get on a BART train. They don't even have to move their car. We need to give incentives to communities that have things like BART stations and have train stations and have places where there are buses. We need to be a lot more focused on rehabilitating that property by building affordable housing at it. Because guess what? A lot of couples, I love it when people say we're going to build the houses next to where people work. Well, a lot of you are in couples. One goes north, one goes south, one goes east, one goes west. You don't get to live next to where everybody works. And so if we built them, though, at transportation hubs, we get a lot of people out of their fossil fuel cars and get a lot more people using different forms of transportation. In Europe, they've done such a good job that in a lot of places, if you get on a modern facility, you get half the time that you spend on it is credited toward your work time. Because they actually have places where people can work. And so I think there is an opportunity here for us to be a lot more focused. Yes, give incentives to speeding up the process. We've got to do this, ladies and gentlemen. I live in Davis, and we have a winter rotating homeless shelter. And guess what? There were people in town didn't want to have it. They didn't want those people. They're going to give them one-way bus tickets from Oakland and from Sacramento, and they're just going to come to Davis. One of the ministers went out and did a survey. Over 60% of the people that are homeless in Davis grew up there. They went home to where they felt safe. It's not a crazy idea, it's smart. So we all need to understand and a bunch of you have, if not your own kids, your nieces and nephews are living at home with their parents. And this is the oldest group of adult children living at home in the country is in California. because they can't afford to move out. I know somebody he and his wife and their kids got kicked out of the apartment they were in because they were converting it to condos, and we need to get rid of Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act. We need to be able to deal with rent control again. But the reality is that he's now remodeling his mother's garage so that he and his children and his wife will have a place to live, because they couldn't. You know you're in trouble when you're on the front page of the New York Times on a Sunday above the fold with a story about a woman in Stockton who's actually commuting into the Bay Area because she couldn't find a place to live in the Bay Area where her job is. They condominiumized her apartment building in Oakland, and now she's living in Stockton. Gets up at 2:30 in the morning, 3-hour commute on the way in, works 8 hours, an hour lunch, 3-hour commute on the way home. She says, I could use some overtime, but I can't possibly do it because I can't stay any longer than 15 hours a day. Okay, yeah.
I wanted to know what your thought was on the water fix and the Delta tunnels in terms of long-term planning for water for California.
You know, the Delta tunnels to me are like, look, a pony. You know, I mean, we had a vote on the peripheral canal. A peripheral canal with a lid on it is called a tunnel. 70% of the people in California turned down the peripheral canal. I would argue that this is a peripheral canal revisited. And until we have a much better study that shows how we protect the San Francisco Bay and Delta, we got no business talking about a twin tunnel. Record rainfall last year, we should have saved that water. We should have had ways to store it and put it in the aquifers. We should have better plans for cleaning gray water. We should have better plans for saving water. Before we do something like the twin tunnels, we really need to do a long-range plan. And included in that plan needs to be some better thinking about how other people, you know, you ever been to Israel? Some of you have been to Israel. They reuse a lot of water. They of course, routinely take care of their gray water and reuse it. You live in a desert, you really ought to be doing that. We live in a desert. And so we ought to have better plans for what we're going to do. Okay.
Thank you.
Steve, what about the bullet train?
Well, I have very mixed feelings about the bullet train. Let me just tell you, when I got accepted at Davis, my dad wanted a new car. We had a 10-year-old car, and they stopped making it. It was a Studebaker. And my mom wanted a new couch, and they wanted to go to the family reunion in Kentucky. So what'd they do? They buy a car? No. They buy a couch? No. They go to Kentucky? No. They sent their daughter to college. If you can't afford to educate your kids, you shouldn't be talking about a big expensive thing like a bullet train. Having said that, it has some appeal to me because it's a cleaner form of energy, but you got to identify a revenue stream. If you borrow the money to build it, it's going to cost so much nobody in this room will be able to buy a ticket. But you know, if you did something like, 33 states produce oil. We're the third largest of the 33 states that produces oil. We're the only state that doesn't have an oil severance tax. If you said, let's have an oil severance tax and we're going to put that money into building the bullet train, then I'd be willing to talk. But I'm not taking it out of the existing income of the state of California because we don't have enough money, and they've totally underestimated what the thing's going to cost. You ain't seen nothing yet. The recent increases are just a fraction of what the actual cost is. So yes, I've been to Europe. Yes, I love the trains of Europe. Yes, I've been to Japan and China. I've been on high-speed trains. I love them. But they're Cadillacs when we can't afford to give our kids shoes. And we can't do that, I don't think. That's my opinion. Anyway, I should go. I have to run to Sacramento and catch a plane to go to Southern California. I thank you all so very, very much. And really appreciate it. Thank you. Feel free to go to take some literature, to go to our website. Obviously, I'm corporate free, so I need help from regular people. If you feel like you could help us, we'd sure appreciate it. We need volunteers. We do need contributions. But again, I'm corporate free. And I think most of you who identify as progressives think that's a good plan. I sure do. Thank you so much, Great to be with you.